Why, oh why, do I do this to myself? What is good, everyone? You've seen the title. I took the lowest rated movie on Rotten Tomatoes from every major animation studio, and I'm gonna rank them. Right off the bat, I'm gonna set the criteria for this video because obviously major animation studio can be kind of subjective and it needs parameters. Criteria 1 is that they have to be a specialized animation studio. So it can't just be a random studio that just releases animation every once in a while like Lionsgate or 20th Century Fox. 2, they have to be a theatrical studio, so I'm not including stuff like Disney Toon or Netflix animation. 3rd, they have to have released at least 5 movies. That gives a little bit more of an accurate sample of what the lowest critic score would be. So something like Skydance or Amblimation, I'm not including those. So I'll be ranking Walt Disney's Chicken Little, Dreamworks' Shark Tale, Sony Animation's The Emoji Movie, Pixar's Cars 2, Blue Sky's Ice Age Collision Course, Warner Animation Group's Space Jam 2, Illumination's Hop, Studio Ghibli's Earwig and the Witch, Laika's Boxtrolls, Aardman Animation's Flushed Away, Warner Bros. Animation's Quest for Camelot, Paramount Animation's Sherlock Gnomes, Cartoon Saloon's My Father's Dragon, and Don Bluth's A Troll from Central Park. Alright, let's not waste any more time. Let's get this torture over with. You knew this movie was going to be bad. I knew this movie was going to be bad. Everyone knew this movie was going to be bad. The question was, how bad? The answer is really daggone bad. I was a little late to watching this movie, and I was expecting it to be quite bad like I said, but I was wondering if I might like it a little bit more than its reputation at the time. Nope. This movie certainly does rip off Inside Out and Wreck-It Ralph, as you've probably heard 1,000 times. And man, are these characters trash. Gene certainly lives up to his name. He is truly like the most nothing main character that I've seen in almost any animated movie. High Five is unbelievably annoying. And Jailbreak just might be the worst female animated character that I'm aware of. She's a hollow shell of a feminist character, her backstory and motives don't make a lot of sense, and she's a complete rip-off of Wild Style from the Lego movie. The product placement in and of itself didn't really bother me, cause we're surrounded by brands anyways, so it's like, why do movies have to pretend they don't exist? But what this movie does is unbelievably cynical. And they take product placement to a whole new level of trash. The fact that they go beyond just simply displaying brands and actually stop to have characters essentially advertise the brand to the audience, and the brands are for a Sony phone made by Sony Animation, that is just next level cynicism and patheticness, especially to aim it at children. Now all of this would have made the Emoji Movie a really bad movie, but what really elevates it to next level awfulness is the ending.
Oh no.
First up, you have Jailbreak's plan, which was to live in the cloud because she felt that the only thing a woman could be on the phone was a princess or a bride. And it's amazing that the movie didn't stop to consider that their own premise contradicted that, where Smither is the leader of the emojis, and she is a woman. But never mind that. You get to the actual resolution. Alex is about to reset the phone and kill all the emojis in the process, and the way that they stop him from doing that and save the day? Well, after the human, Alex, discovers that his crush is at the store with him, he wants to send one last message to her before the phone gets wiped out. And since Gene is the only emoji that can show multiple emotions, he decides to send Gene's romantic-faced emoji to his crush, and she responds like this.
That's one super cool emoji. A lot of feelings in one. I get it. I like that you're one of those guys who can actually express his feelings.
What?
And then to make it 10 times poopier, this movie actually goes on to have Alex stop resetting the phone because his crush fell for him after that one emoji, which literally makes 0 sense. How is the phone suddenly not damaged just because you had one successful emoji on it? It's still defective, and that one stupid emoji doesn't change that at all. But because this movie is so poorly written, it doesn't matter. Then they have the audacity to end with some tropey dance number. Like, just get out of here. For my money, this is the worst third act that I've seen in any movie. And I'm not being hyperbolic there. When I think of the 3 movies that I hate the most, my top 3 would be G-Force, then the Emoji Movie, and then Flywheel. So yeah, when looking at this, you can see that the Emoji Movie is my least favorite animated movie that I've ever seen. I will give it to this movie that it is nicely animated, which, compared to some of the other bottom-of-the-barrel animated films, is definitely something to appreciate. But other than that, I think that the Rotten Tomatoes critic consensus pretty much sums up this movie the best. Now let's move on from this piece of...
Number 2!
Believe me when I tell you that I did not want to hate this movie. At the time that it was about to be released, I was still one of the fans of the Ice Age franchise. I had wide-eyed optimism, and I had loved the original trilogy, and I really liked the 4th movie a lot, too. So I was excited when I saw this movie was coming out. And even as that brain-dead kid, I could still recognize while watching this movie, man, this is bad. I don't know how the promotional poster of Scrap being in space wasn't enough to tip me off that this franchise had completely lost the plot, but for whatever reason, I was still willing to give it a chance. And yeah, it is... Let me just get into it. So the movie kicks off with Manny forgetting to get his wife an anniversary gift, and Sid is whining and crying about because he can't find a girlfriend. And Manny is also rehashing his character arc from the 4th movie, where he's overprotective of Peaches once she's about to marry some dumb loser named Julian. And once it's time for Manny to have to present his anniversary gift, suddenly some meteorites caused by Scrat messing with a UFO in space come crashing down to Earth and causing major destruction. Then, Buck finds the herd and tells them that he discovered a stone prophecy that foretold that a giant doomsday meteor was about to hit the Earth. Still with me? Good. Buckle up because we're about to enter into astronomical levels of stupid. So they journey to the site of the previous doomsday asteroid, and they discover that inside the previous asteroid, there lived a group of immortal animals that are able to stay young forever because the rocks inside of the asteroid are magic crystals, I guess. And they're also flying and floating rocks. And Scrat gets acorns zapped into his nipples. And then Sid does something stupid to collapse the entire meteor and causes everyone inside to become old. And then the animals gather up all the rocks and throw inside the volcano, and then Julian and Manny gather up the biggest rock and they haul inside the volcano themselves, and then that becomes a bonding moment where Manny becomes happy with Julian and accepts his marriage with Peaches. Then the volcano erupts the rocks in the air, which creates a powerful magnetic force powerful enough to pull the doomsday asteroid away from hitting the Earth and send it back into space. Stupid dance and musical number. Scrat commits genocide on Mars. The end. If you had a hard time following that, good. This movie is just as nonsensical and incoherent as it sounded. All of the characters, and I mean all, are extremely unlikable, annoying, or unfunny. Brooke's romantic relation with Sid is truly one of the most forced romances that I've ever seen brought to film entirely.
I know this is going to sound super forward, but will you be my mate for life? My mate for life.
My mate for life. It's only been 12 minutes. What took you so long? Yes! I thought you were...
Nothing about Sid's appearance and presentation would make you think that someone portrayed the way Brooke is would fall in love with him at first sight. Nothing except the fact that the movie makers just stopped giving a crap. Julian is absolutely insufferable. And what the heck happened to Louise from Continental Drift? This movie almost seemed to forget what happened in the fourth movie and just throw you in the middle of something random. Not even Buck is enjoyable in this movie, and he was the best part of Ice Age 3. The villains of these 3 dinosaurs, their plan to just fly over the destruction is just so mind-numbingly stupid that I don't even care to go further into it. Oh yeah, and Diego's in this movie. Yeah, he has nothing to do in this film, so he just gets a couple of brief lines between him and Shira about kids being afraid of them, and then at the end of the film, kids are just suddenly not afraid of them. I mean, holy stinking crap. This movie is really almost like a parody of Jumping the Shark with a franchise. How do you go from a simple story about some prehistoric animals bringing a human baby back to his tribe to flying rocks, UFOs, immortal animals, and Sid getting a girlfriend? On the bright side, there may have been like 1 or 2 passable jokes, and the animation is still quite good. But this movie effectively turned me more cynical towards the Ice Age sequels, and I'm glad to see that this franchise has finally gone extinct. Oh, come on! With the prestigious reputation and distinct animation style that Studio Ghibli has, it's honestly quite shocking that they made a movie like Earwig and the Witch. I almost didn't believe this actually was part of Studio Ghibli's official filmography. I thought this was like some kind of made-for-TV movie, but no! This is officially part of Studio Ghibli's canon. This was their first crack at a CGI animated film, and boy, were they not ready for it. This movie has the type of second-rate, cheap animation that you would expect from preschool shows like Sid the Science Kid. Not a top animation studio in the business. And they couldn't even get the lip syncing right. Like, while I was watching this movie, the characters' mouths weren't moving at all with what they were actually saying. Okay, I'm obviously joking, alright? This movie wasn't made in English. I was just watching the English version. Gee whiz. The story not only feels non-existent, but it somehow feels unfinished at the same time. This movie just leaves so many plot points unanswered and unexplained. The trailers and poster really market some kind of band that Earwig comes to discover, but the actual movie has so little to actually do with that. And you barely even understand what the dynamics of the band even were. The movie begins with Earwig's mother dropping her off at an orphanage to avoid being chased by some bad guys, and then a couple years later, she finally reunites with Earwig for the first time, and then the movie just ends. There's no explanation as to where Earwig's mother had been all those years, and why these bad people were chasing Earwig's mother to begin with, and what took her mother so long to get back to her. So we just spend the entire movie with Earwig just meandering around the house, working for a mean witch, until Earwig learns how to use the vaguely described band that the witch was in to manipulate her and her husband to give her everything that she wants. I guess Earwig's conversations with the talking cat were enjoyable sometimes, but there's not necessarily a ton of positives with this movie. Earwig and the Witch was an absolute disaster. I'll start by saying this. When it comes to Cars 2 and the next film on this list, the next film on this list is probably the technically worst film. But when it comes to my own personal honest opinion, I definitely despise Cars 2 more. So, sorry to all the Cars 2 defenders, but I just don't see it. Cars 2 has like a personal distaste for me because I watched this film straight after Cars 1, and I would consider Cars 1 to be one of the most pleasant surprises that I've ever seen, because it just did so much with a very simple story. And to me, Cars 2 took one of the worst turns that you could take with a Cars sequel, let alone a Pixar movie entirely. Cars 2 commits the same sin as Ice Age 5 with genre derailment. To transition from an Americana sports movie to this spy comedy and swapping Lightning for Mater, it just continues to be such an awful decision that I just cannot get past. The entire time watching this, I genuinely could not believe that this was a Pixar movie. This movie just utterly lacks the depth of all of the other Pixar films before it, largely because Mater lacks a lot of depth. He's designed as a comic relief, and Cars 2 also commits the Minions crime of elevating a shallow comic relief to the main role, and you get a bad result. Given that none of the plot lines from Cars 2 are continued in Cars 3, what that tells me is that Pixar was not only ashamed of Cars 2, but that Cars 2 is just a completely disposable film in the Cars trilogy. It adds just about nothing to actually progress the story, and thus destroys the Cars trilogy, because you would just go straight from Lightning being a rookie to him being ready to retire, because Cars 2 didn't do anything to properly expand on what was done in Cars 1. They set up something good with the Grand Prix, but because they decided to focus entirely on Mater, I just don't feel any progression to Lightning's story. To me, this is an embarrassment to the Cars franchise, an embarrassment to Pixar, and a shameful cash grab. I do enjoy the Grand Prix racing sequences when they happen, and the animation certainly is very good, still very much up to Pixar quality. But man, every time I rewatch this movie, which is almost never, it just reminds me of just how crushingly disappointing it was. Very much a flat tire in Pixar's filmography.
You've been trolled, you should probably just...
So I imagine that this is a movie that most of you have not seen, and believe me, you are not missing out on anything at all. The plot centers around a troll named Stanley who gets banished from his troll world because he offended the queen by making flowers with his green thumb. And she's an evil queen that hates flowers and all things nice. So he's punished by getting banished to a dark, horrifying, and barren place known as, well, Central Park. You know, a place that's definitely not known for having any flowers. Some real genius villains we have in this movie. But anyways, he meets two kids that live in New York City and drop by to Central Park, and he takes them on an adventure through fantastical crap inside of a sewer until the queen decides that Stanley is having too much fun in Central Park, so she decides to finish him off herself. So she travels to Central Park and kidnaps the little girl in order to lure Stanley to her. And then some kind of thumb war happens.
Wait a minute, what?
And then the queen turns into flowers, and then... I mean, I really can barely describe the plot of this movie because it really is utter nonsense. The movie has absolutely zero distinction between what is taking place in reality and what the characters are imagining. So it just makes everything so confusing, and you can't really care about anything because you don't even really know what's actually happening. There's a point in this film where whatever this loser kid's name is, he has a toy boat, and Stanley turns it into a flying boat and transports them to some utopian-looking society with a bunch of random characters, and all of this is taking place inside of a Central Park sewer, with no explanation at all. Oh yeah, and this movie is supposed to be a musical, and it's not a very good one.
Stop it.
I mean, this movie is almost like a parody of the most generic template for a kid's film that you could think of. Just full of flowers, rainbows, sunshine, and smiling faces, but absolutely no plot or substance. On a technical level, this movie is probably worse than Cars 2, but this movie didn't bore me or annoy me as much as Cars 2 did, so it pretty much edges it out, but it's still very bad. Shark Tale is quite a fascinating fail by Dreamworks. I don't have a ton of recollection watching this movie as a kid. I pretty much only remember watching some of this movie while I was at a babysitter's house, and then my parents came to pick me up before it finished. Maybe that was merciful. This movie is pretty much an endless stream of cringe. A ton of the humor relies on a bunch of lazy, fishified pop culture references, and the animated fish are definitely horrifying. But after a while, I did get used to it. What really bothers me more is that the characters just don't look like they belong in the backgrounds at all. They look separated from the backgrounds, which just gives the movie a weird feel. This movie can be very funny sometimes, at times because of how cringe it is, but I have to say, I do find the nature of this movie to be kind of hilariously ironic. One of the central messages of the movie is to not rely so much on superficial things to define yourself, and this movie is pretty much completely defined by cheap pop culture references and a stacked celebrity voice cast, despite at its core being a generic lie revealed story with terrible animation. Now, I'm someone that tends to not mind the lie reveal trope too much, so that really doesn't annoy me too much about this movie, but that doesn't mean it was executed well. The whole movie is flimsily hinged on the notion that Oscar killed the Godfather shark's son to the point where he becomes a town celebrity, and even the mafia sharks are terrified of him, and when they see him beating up the Godfather shark's other son, they run away in fear and panic. So let me get this straight. Throughout the entire movie, the mafia sharks completely didn't respect the other Godfather's son, Lenny, because he was viewed as a softie as he didn't want to eat any fish. But yet, when Oscar pretends to kill him, all the mafia sharks just watch him do it, don't even dare to challenge him, and just run away panicking like little guppies because the laughingstock of their gang got beat up. Yeah, because if they actually used common sense, then the movie would have ended too early. Worst mafia ever. Also, the ending to this movie kinda sucks. It starts out pretty good with an exciting chase of the Godfather pursuing Oscar, but it just quickly turns into some kind of Dr. Phil session for fish.
Because when you feel like a dirtbag, it's because you're a dirtbag, right? So just own it. Just say it out loud. I am a dirtbag.
Followed by an extremely rushed confession of his lies by Oscar, and then a dance number. The movie can also be tonally confusing sometimes. Like, when Lenny's brother dies, his immediate reaction to it is almost played like a joke, and you can't even really tell if you're supposed to feel sad or start laughing. I am kind of railing on this movie because it is quite bad, but it does have bright spots. I do think all the voice acting is still really good. Will Smith gives a solid performance, and it kind of feels like Oscar was written with Will Smith in mind, and this movie does have a flurry of other engaging side characters. For the most part, this movie is certainly not boring, but it is definitely not good. Sherlock Gnomes.
The games of
A movie that I can guarantee I would not have watched outside of this ranking, but having seen it, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's not good. So for those who don't know, this movie was meant to be a sequel to the 2011 film Romeo and Juliet, and that film sounds like it was a romantic comedy film, whereas Sherlock Gnomes is obviously a mystery film. So this movie probably committed the same crime that Cars 2 and Ice Age 5 did of genre derailment, but since I have no real attachment to Romeo and Juliet, I really don't care that much. The movie follows Sherlock Gnomes, who tries to track down some evil pie guy who kidnapped all of the gnomes in Romeo and Juliet's garden. And the mystery really isn't all that interesting. I don't know, the whole mystery just felt kind of like a party game, where the villain is literally leaving calling cards for Sherlock to find, followed by some interim musical numbers. But then this movie actually tries to outsmart itself by revealing Watson to be one of the early villains behind the kidnappings. But then, double twist, Watson didn't realize that he was being manipulated by Pie Guy, who convinced Watson to kidnap the gnomes, but didn't tell him that he was planning to kill the gnomes. So then Watson apologizes to Sherlock and Juliet and tells them that he was really only sending them through this mystery chase just to get Sherlock's attention and try to get Sherlock to respect him more. And then the movie tries to frame Watson as some kind of sympathetic good guy now. So let me get this straight. Watson commits mass kidnapping, nearly got Nomeo killed in the process of faking his death, just because he was upset at Sherlock for not giving him enough attention and respect. And you expect me to feel sorry for this sadistic little dweeb? He can get run over by a lawnmower for all I care. I will admit I didn't necessarily see the twist coming, but like with The Last Jedi, just because you do something unexpected doesn't make it good. Sherlock himself was occasionally kind of funny, but for the most part he was quite an unlikable dirtbag, so he wasn't all that enjoyable to watch either. I wasn't necessarily bored watching this movie, but it certainly wasn't all that entertaining either.
LeBron James, LeBron James, LeBron James.
Maybe it's because LeBron is my favorite player, maybe it's because Looney Tunes is my favorite TV show, but I find this movie to be kind of fun. I mean, it's certainly not good, but I mean, I didn't expect it to be good. This was one of those movies that I just went in knowing that it's probably gonna be bad, but at least I can have fun with it. And I did. I mean, the first Space Jam wasn't that good either. There's not much you're gonna get out of a franchise that's premise was built off of a shoe commercial.
This could be the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Much of the acting is not good, but again, that's not really surprising at all. Basketball players are generally not known for being Oscar-worthy actors, but I just enjoyed spending time with all the Looney Tunes characters. Except Pepe Le Pew. Was it probably kind of cynical for Warner Bros. To shove the Looney Tunes characters all throughout their IPs? Yeah, probably. But it was still fun to see these Looney Tunes characters do their own versions of these IP worlds, like Daffy being with the Justice League or Granny being with the Matrix. The best character by far was Don Cheadle's Algae Rhythm. I mean, it just seemed like Don Cheadle was just having an absolute blast doing this role, and it was kind of cool to just see his fun side after mostly seeing him as the serious war machine. And this movie didn't cheap out on the visuals, so they actually look really nice, especially during the third act basketball battle. Yeah, I'm not gonna try to defend this movie. The plot is total nonsense and obviously just an excuse to set up a basketball game. This is still a pretty bad movie, but hey, I still have fun with it, so it's maybe a little bit of a guilty pleasure.
Tastes like chicken.
Quick point, Chicken Little and Brother Bear actually have the same score on Rotten Tomatoes, but Chicken Little has more reviews for it, and the bigger the sample size, the more shameful the score, so Chicken Little remained the one that I chose. Chicken Little is one of the weirdest movies in Disney's filmography, and I kind of respect it a little for that. This movie came out around the time that I was in early elementary school, so I'd remember watching movies like this and other post-Renaissance Disney films at school, and there are some iconic things that I definitely even remember growing up about this movie, especially being, of course, Chicken Little's whole sky is falling panic. I am genuinely surprised by how funny this movie can be, because similar to Shark Tale, this movie is just jam-packed with way too much pop culture reference humor, but it still does get in a good bit of solid jokes.
No, I don't think so. It sounds familiar, doesn't it to you?
It's just too bad that this story just sucks some real, donkey. This movie essentially has no second act. It essentially goes from Chicken Little is a loser that wants to impress his father by playing baseball, and then an alien invasion happens. There's a brief snippet in between there where Chicken Little does discover the spaceship and an alien child, but that hardly is enough to really justify a middle act of a movie. And because of just the lack of a real second act, the movie's pacing is absolutely awful. The pace moves very slow while Chicken Little is just trying to be a baseball star to suddenly some chaotic, fast-paced apocalyptic nightmare. Every time I watch this movie, I keep thinking that once Chicken Little is in the lawn with the baby alien, trying to figure out what to do with him, I think there's like a whole nother act to the movie left, like Chicken Little's gonna try hiding the baby from his father and learn more about the baby's home world. But no, it just goes straight into an attack. And then to make the ending even weirder, Chicken Little just suddenly kisses this ugly duckling on the lips out of nowhere. Another positive I can give this movie, though, is that the music is solid throughout. It's not a musical, thank goodness, but the inserted songs are very enjoyable. The movie does have a little bit of a mean-spirited tone throughout, so that's not really the best. I'm pretty sure this movie had a very troubled production, and it's ultimately very much seen in this very chaotic and uneven film. Chicken Little is mediocre, but it is one of the most unique specimens in Disney's history. Quest for Camelot is probably the most generic movie on this list. I wouldn't be surprised if many of you have not seen or even heard of this movie. It's about a woman who dreams of being a knight, and one day she and a blind man that lived in the forest, they team up to try finding King Arthur's sword Excalibur after a bad knight tried to take it away from King Arthur, and it ended up getting lost in the middle of nowhere. This movie is a musical, and there are some pretty solid songs in here, like the song The Prayer. I mean, I always just knew that song as being a more Christian song, and I did not realize that that song was actually initially made for this movie soundtrack. You chose that song for this movie? This movie? But there are other times where this movie just seriously doesn't know how to properly incorporate songs into a musical. And there's a point in this movie where the two-headed dragons that you see on the cover, they sing a song about how they hate each other and wish that they were separated. And then the girl and blind guy, their names are Kaylee and Garrett by the way, they just start clapping like it was a little theater performance, and then they just move on with the next scene. They don't even stop to talk about it to flesh anything out. They just treat it like it's just a random interim song, as if the two dragons didn't just unload some pretty serious and heavy information, but the movie and characters just go on without even addressing it or caring. There's also a point in the movie where Garrett gets shot by an arrow and he's badly wounded, and while Kaylee is tending to him, they just suddenly break out into a love song out of nowhere, and a completely unexplained plant is just placed on Garrett's wound, and he's just all of a sudden completely healed. And the villain song in this movie has imagery that's very reminiscent of Be Prepared from The Lion King. Pretty much for background context, Quest for Camelot was made around the height of the Disney Renaissance era, and you can definitely see how this movie was trying to copy off of Disney's movies and especially their fairy tales. That's why the songs can sometimes just feel like they're just being forced in there, and why the fantastical elements of the world building can be so random, like a healing plant that's never established or explained at all, and just the entire forest is coming to life and doing completely random things based off of what the plot needs it to do. I guess one thing that this film did do different that I kind of liked is that it did have a bit more of a focus on living with disabilities, like having Garrett be blind, and it was still kind of cool to see how he navigated through the forest and was able to teach Kaylee new things despite not having a sight. And also the dragons were probably within that theme too of living with disability. So I thought that was a pretty well handled theme. It's watchable enough, I guess, but Quest for Camelot is the most generic version of a Disney movie that you could get. That is until Wish came out. Similar to Space Jam 2, Hop is another movie that is kind of indefensible, but I do think it has more redeeming qualities than Space Jam 2. The movie kind of has a better plot to work with, I guess. I mean, it focuses on the Easter Bunny that's next up, named E.B. Clever, right? Not really wanting to be the Easter Bunny, and meeting a human that does want the job of the Easter Bunny. Well, meeting might be the lighter way of putting it. In general, I just liked the dynamic between the bunny and James Marsden. I mean, Russell Brand did a pretty good job voice acting this punk-ass drummer Easter Bunny. And what can I say? James Marsden is just the master of talking to nothing animals. Maybe he should be the next Doolittle. Also, I don't care what anyone says. When James Marsden and the bunny sing I Want Candy at the children's play, I just really loved that whole performance by them overall. In the context of the movie, Marsden's younger sister had a major singing role in her school Easter play, but after E.B. infiltrated the stage and James Marsden had to stop him, they just broke out into just an all-out I Want Candy song. I mean, probably a jerkish thing to completely ruin his sister's big moment. In fact, I don't even give a crap about his little sister. Like, screw his dumb sister. Whoa, where did that come from?
Get some help.
I must be losing my mind a little bit from watching so many bad movies for this. Well, let me just take a breather. I mean, this still isn't that great of a movie. The villain chicks are pretty forgettable, and the movie is just too slow-paced, so it can get pretty boring sometimes, as well as kind of nonsensical. But I still think this movie is a little bit overhated. If you liked Sonic 1, I would recommend giving this movie another chance. Again, it's not really that good. I'm not going to try defending it and saying it's great or anything, but I do think it's okay. So I'd probably say Flushed Away is the first movie on this list that I would lean firmly positive on, but it would be more of a mixed positive than anything. I think this movie has phenomenal world building by just having this whole underground sewer world after the main character, the main character, Roddy. Ha, get it? Roddy, rodent. But anyways, after Roddy gets flushed away...
That's the name of the movie. It is.
The world building is just fantastic. Just the whole way that they design this underground sewer world, it just feels lived in and well detailed. But I'm sorry, this movie just never has me in the first half. I mean, it's not like it's awful or something, but I just never really feel that connected to the story at all, and I just don't find it that funny. But after the French frog henchmen get hired by the villain frog, I mean, this movie really picks up a lot. The frog henchmen are extremely funny, and the humor just completely picks up from there. We get some epic boat chase sequences, and Roddy gets a more developed relationship with Rita, and we dive a little bit more into Roddy's loneliness and eventually going back for Rita. Flushed Away is just kind of a tale of two halves to me, and the whole is still a pretty enjoyable watch, especially compared to the rest of the feces on this list. I hadn't seen a cartoon Saloon movie prior to making this list, but if My Father's Dragon is the worst that they have, that's a pretty good sign for this studio. First off, the animation to My Father's Dragon is just absolutely stellar. It's kind of animated like a picture book, and especially once it reaches the point where the boy goes off to the fantastical island where he meets the dragon, just the designs of the natural landscapes, all of it looks absolutely phenomenal. The movie is based off of a children's book that I hadn't read before, but it's about a boy that travels off to an island to try finding a dragon to bring back to his home city, where he can show off the dragon to the town, and in doing so, make money to help him and his struggling mother. But ultimately, when the boy arrives at the island, he finds that the dragon is held in captivity, as the island is actually sinking, so they need to chain the dragon to the island so that he can keep flying upward to keep it afloat. Overall, the boy's relation with the dragon was just pretty endearing and enjoyable to watch. And I also really liked how the villains of the movie, which were these monkeys, and really just everyone on the island, they had understandable motives for wanting to chain up the dragon, as without him, they're all literally going to sink and die. And so it just adds a little bit more of an interesting dynamic. I really don't have a ton of negatives towards this movie, though I would also say I don't have a ton of strong positives besides the animation. I mean, I guess the dragon was kind of annoying sometimes, and I don't really think I laughed once in this film, but this film really wasn't trying to aim for necessarily a ton of humor, and the jokes really didn't annoy me either. I wouldn't call this a great movie, I would say it's good, which is basically Citizen Kane compared to everything else on this list. It's nothing special, but it is a solid watch.
I saw you with the box. What was in the box?
The Boxtrolls. They're trolls in boxes.
Wow.
When I saw the trailer for this movie as a kid, I wanted to watch it. And then I never did. For a full decade until this list. And it's good. I just thoroughly enjoyed the creativity of this film and seeing the Boxtrolls come up with all these creative contraptions, and they would just use their boxes to the fullest of their abilities. And the main character, Eggs, I enjoyed his story too. He was an orphaned child who was raised by the Boxtrolls and believed that he was a Boxtroll until he meets a girl named Winifred who shows them that he is a human, and together they hatch a plan to try rescuing the trolls from a villain that's trying to capture and kill all of them in order to impress the leader of the town. I thought Archibald Snatcher was a great villain. He was well voiced by Ben Kingsley, his demeanor and mannerisms were very memorable, and I really liked how they added the dynamic to him, where he really wanted to be part of a prestigious cheese club while being allergic to cheese. And there are some pretty grotesque images showing his allergic reactions. And as for his henchmen, they were pretty good too, although it did always sound kind of off-putting to be hearing Tracy Morgan's voice coming out of this character. And I thought the third act of this film went really well. There were some pretty unexpected things that happened with just how the Boxtrolls escaped certain situations, as well as deeper reveals about Eggs's father, and just the overall final battle. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I will say that Winnie's father was absolutely insufferable, and I did also think that the gimmick of Snatcher dressing as a woman started to strain a lot of credibility with how many guys were convinced by it, and sometimes it actually did feel a little bit like the trolls were complete background characters in their own movie. But they still did appear enough, so it wasn't too big of a problem. I still wouldn't call this a great movie. I mean, hey, we are talking about the lowest rated film, so it's not a surprise that none of these films would be great. But in general, the stop motion animation's pretty solid. There's some good humor and an overall enjoyable story. So when it comes to the best of the worst for the major animation studios, Laika comes out on top with the Boxtrolls. Man, I just survived one of the most grueling videos that I'll probably have to do, but barely. Thank you for watching, hit that subscribe button, check out some of the other rankings I have on my channel like my Pixar sequels, animated fourth movies, and I will catch you in the next video.